Hello everybody, this is Mr. Laubach. Thank you for joining me. In this video, we are going to explore the evolution of chattel slavery and the strict racial laws that took root in the British colonies of America during period 2 in the APUSH curriculum, which ran from 1607, the founding of Jamestown, to 1754, the beginning of the French and Indian War. Slavery in the British colonies began in the early 17th century, primarily as a means to address labor shortages in the New World. The first recorded arrival of African slaves in the English colonies was in 1619, when a Dutch ship brought 20 Africans to Jamestown, Virginia. Initially, these Africans were treated similarly to indentured servants, who worked for a set number of years before gaining freedom. However, as demand for labor grew, especially in the tobacco and later on cotton plantations, these colonies increasingly turned to African slaves as a more permanent and inheritable source of labor. By many accounts, as slaves became more numerous in the colonies, the conditions became more harsh and dehumanizing. It is very important to keep in mind that during period 2, all of the British colonies participated to a varying degree in the Atlantic slave trade. Slavery was legal in every British colony during period 2, though it was less prevalent in the northern colonies due to a lack of economic need. Seaport colonies were actively involved in the slave trade, providing food, buying molasses, making and selling rum, and transporting slaves from Africa. While sugar colonies in the West Indies, the Caribbean, drew the vast majority of slaves, the Chesapeake region, South Carolina, and Georgia also heavily relied on enslaved labor. As chattel slavery became the dominant labor system in many southern colonies, colonial laws and customs evolved to institutionalize slavery and define the status of African slaves and their descendants as property, leading to a system of chattel slavery. This system denied slaves basic human rights and ensured their perpetual bondage, creating a rigid racial hierarchy that would persist for centuries. Now let's take a closer look at some of the key moments in this dark chapter of American history. In 1662, Virginia passed a significant law that determined a child's status based on the status of their mother. This law meant that children born to enslaved mothers would also be enslaved, ensuring the perpetuation of slavery through generations. Just 7 years later, in 1669, another Virginia law was enacted that would shock our modern sensibilities. It declared that if a slave owner killed their slave, it would not be considered a punishable offense. This law effectively dehumanized enslaved individuals, stripping them of any semblance of a legal protection. The landscape of labor in the colonies was dramatically altered by Bacon's Rebellion in 1675 and 1676. I also have another YouTube video which goes into more detail on Bacon's Rebellion. This rebellion highlighted the dangers of relying on white indentured servitude and pushed the elite in Virginia to favor African slavery as a more controllable labor force. Moving forward to 1692, a law was passed that made interracial sex illegal. While this law was often ignored by white males, who in many cases would rape their African American female slaves, it imposed severe penalties for black males, reinforcing the racial divide and control over African American lives. By 1705, Virginia had codified into law that all African Americans were to be considered slaves. This sweeping legislation ensured that every person of African descent was legally bound to a life of servitude, erasing any hope for freedom. Additional laws further restricted the lives of African Americans. They were prohibited from owning guns, joining the militia, owning white indentured servants, and gaining freedom through religious conversions. Each law tightened the grip of slavery and racial discrimination. All of these laws laid the groundwork for the deeply entrenched racial system that would persist in America for centuries. They reveal how legal frameworks were used to perpetuate inequality and control of African Americans. Understanding these historical laws helps us to comprehend the roots of racial inequality and the long-lasting impact of slavery in America. So I hope you were able to learn a lot from this video about slavery and the evolution of it during Period 2. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.